And I just want to welcome everybody to our February 2026 Lunch, Learn, and Collaborate meeting. If you recall, the January one, Semi presented on external modules, and today Marcelina is going to present on surveys to always have a few maybe non-significant but interesting stuff, stats about our system. If I put the right screen, there you go. In the ITS REDCap, we have a total of 362 projects. 131 are production and 231 are in development. And if those numbers add up, it should be 362. Active users, we've got approximately 373 out of total of 590 users. But the difference of those two is the balance is they're suspended because of inactivity. Got 9 Mosio projects in the ITS REDCap. I had decided to add a little bit more FYI, especially when I've been dealing with some users who are migrating their projects as multi-year data collection projects. Sometimes we have to break the data, not the metadata, but the data up into chunks to move it over. But I want to give an idea of what kind of data size all the projects have. In our MySQL base, we have approximately 11.5 gigabytes of data. And then on the file server, which is the web server, we have approximately 26.69 gigabyte file data. I want to mention a couple of announcements that a little bit of here. In the request portal under the REDCap hub, there's going to be a change in the process for the account request. And I'll push it out probably, if not today, by the end of the week. And the addition is when the user requester pushes the button to submit, it will send an email to that requester. And in that email, there'll be a link to directly go to that form to fill out. This is to cut out a step that seems to be happening where in the portal, I probably could go it. So in the portal, you've got the 3 levels. You got the REDCap hub request, and then you've got the Red, and then the 3rd level account request. Right now, when you click that, there is a segment further down the page that may or may not be seen depending on the resolution of your screen or the size of your monitor. And so I decided the colleague, me and my REDCap admin colleagues decided to maybe add a step that would avoid somebody when they submit that ticket in the comment box. If you recall, you can comment and they'll say, I need a user account. Well, that's an extra step. That means someone that's monitoring the REDCap mailbox has to reach back out to that user and send them a link to the user account request form. And so instead, I added the product to send it an email, something similar to this, but the link to the user request will be email. And there's 2 good things about that. A, he or she can click on that and go ahead and fill the form out. The REDCap admin team doesn't have to individually. That does take a little bit of time, and actually it slows the user getting their account. And also this is in an email. So if moving forward in time, if that user is maybe a project manager on a project, and he or she needs to request multiple users to be added to their project, they can just they'll have that link in their email, and then they can go and do the again. Another time, and so of course, clicking on that link would bring up this familiar form that everybody's filled out, I'm sure, or somebody's filled it out for you, depending on if it's for yourself or your sponsored users. The other topic that I want to announce is I was sitting there last week thinking about, I'm always trying to get people to join us. And people are busy. Maybe people don't like talking in groups of people. Maybe they don't think they got something cool enough to share. But we always had that link, or a link like this. Is not this link, but a link like that in the chat that people can go to or send email to do various things. This is another link we're going to share. This is a survey that allowed them to, if they want to join us, to share their project ideas. Clicking on that link there will bring up something similar to this. And the first part, we're just gathering up some demographic about you so that we can reach out to you and put and work around a presentation, one of our monthly LLCs. The line here, basically, you mentioned what you may be interested in doing. And example here, challenges that I had in migration, right? And then in the latter part, which a latter part of the survey, I put in some common, what I think would be some common questions or ideas people might want to share, but also other topic. If you click on that, this box will pop down, and you can add information more to explain your interest of sharing what you share. And in this example, I had put out that I've got two topics I wanted to talk about. One is moving a large project, again, multi-year, a lot of data, some of the challenges you made that I had at pretending like, and then I needed a project. Also had Mosio, so I needed test challenges on testing the Mosio and the ITS REDCap, for example. And then we've listed here all the coming LLCs that we're going to be having the date of each month to October. November and December, we paused because people are shifting to vacation planning for the holidays. And it's just like any other survey. My colleague Alex is going to put in the chat several links in the chat for you to have. Remember, these slides will also be sent to you by Friday by my colleague Simi, who will have all the slides that will be presented each month. And so you can always go back. If you save them, you can go back and reference them and what have you. And again, this will be the link. It'll be, I think one of the links is going to be called the guest speaker interest survey, and it'll be that link in the list of links that Alex is going to share with you. Just want to remind everybody, if you don't mind, stay in mute in the presentation. We're certainly going to pause after the presentation to speak to address any questions, ideas, suggestions, thoughts you might have. All right. Today, as I mentioned, Marcelina is going to present on surveys, advanced features. And with that, I will stop sharing and Marcelina take over.
Hi everyone, I'm Marcelina Nogales. I'm going to talk about surveys and advanced features in REDCap. For our agenda today, we'll talk about the difference between data forms and surveys, how to create a survey, all the different customizations you can do in survey settings, how to distribute a survey, and there's multiple different ways. I think the best part about REDCap is sometimes, often enough, multiple use cases will fit what you want for your project design. So you'll just you can sift through the different options to see what works best for you, and then also what works best for your workflow. And then just a little bit about surveys in longitudinal projects and what a typical use case looks like that has surveys and data forms mixed in together. Oops. So, when you create an instrument in REDCap, they'll typically look something like this when you go in to fill it out. when you want to access and input information into data forms, you have to be an authorized REDCap user to do that, and you have to also be authorized within that particular project. Within your user rights for access, you can customize that based on the user itself, can have read-only, edit, depending on what the data form is, and depending on the surveys as well. For the user that's entering data, they can mark the form as complete or incomplete at the end of it, as well as unverified. And that's just something that's different from how it's typically set up for surveys, where that's not an option for them. This is what we see in REDCap for the request portal that Mark had mentioned for our technical support. And as we flip through the next couple of slides, you'll see what that looks like as a survey instead. So our typical use for data forms is if you're entering in the data, like your staff is entering the data, if you need to edit the data frequently as opposed to just the one time and review. And then if there are permissions and audit control that you need. So when you're entering in data into a data form, what you'll see in your logs is specifically which user is accessing and what data they've updated. You can't necessarily see that on the survey side. So this is what a version of the survey will look like. This is just that same data form that we had before, but as a survey. As you see, the formatting is a little bit differently, so it's much more user-friendly for the general populace. It's a version of the data form that you can have a study participant complete without having them be a REDCap user. You can either have participants enter their data via a public link or a private link, and we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about how to distribute a survey. And this is really good if you're self-reporting the data. So here are our typical use cases. So we'll see it on occasion for screening, follow-up assessments, baseline. It's basically when participants are entering their own data. If you're going to send this out to invite participants to complete the survey, either via email or SMS, it's easier to send out a survey link rather than a data form link because they'll need to be a REDCap user instead. And there's the anonymous, if you aren't collecting PHI data within a survey, there's some anonymity, and as well as it's easier to access because you can just go to that public link. So within REDCap, within the project, on your record status dashboard, you can actually see a visible difference between which ones are forms and which ones are surveys. So for example, anything that's a survey will have either the orange check mark or the green check mark, depending on how it's been filled out. If there's no data saved, there's not a differentiation between the two. This will be applicable to both data forms and surveys. But if the data has been entered within REDCap, as a REDCap user and not as a survey, you'll actually see it without the check mark here. So if you are filling out a survey, but on the back end, so within REDCap, you won't see a check mark because it wasn't filled out as a survey, even if it is a survey listed. So that's just like the quickest rundown of the difference between a data form and a survey. Do I have any questions before I move on? Okay, seeing none, I'll keep going. So when you're creating a survey, when you start, you'll need to go into your project setup and enable surveys in the project. So this will initially, when you start up and create a project, this will be disabled. So once you enable it, then you'll have the option to, like, this whole column here will be enabled. So that way you can click the enabled button. As you can see here, this is what the instruments look like when they are enabled as a survey, is that green box with the person icon there. And then once we enable it, we'll get additional options here for survey related options, survey settings, and automated survey invitations, which we'll get into in the next couple of sections. So when you talk about the survey settings, So if we go back, we click on survey settings here. This is particular to each of the instruments, and these can change depending on what you want for each particular instrument. So we first start off with survey status, whether it's active or offline. If it's offline, that means participants can't access it even if they have that public link. And you can add an offline message. Oops. You can add an offline message here that specifies like, hey, this survey is not available at this time. Please come back later, or like the window for the survey has ended. What we sometimes find with the migration, if you're in between data collection, you can often have an offline message stating like, this is the new link for the new survey, so that you know that you're collecting all the data in one place. Your survey design options are the survey title that appears in the survey itself, so that when users are or participants are navigating through the survey, they know what survey they're filling out, and then any other additional instructions that they may need at the top. You can add more customizations in terms of logos. You can see a little bit of what an enhanced radio button or checkbox is when I flip back to this. So an enhanced radio button is going to have a bigger box. So this is for maybe if you have more of a paragraph that you want them to select, and then if you have images as well. Otherwise, it'll look something more like this with the typical standard radio buttons that they can select, but this can get kind of hard to read if there are paragraphs of information that you're trying to communicate with. I'll jump back here. The survey customizations are whether or not you want your questions to have numbers. If you have a typically long survey, you can section off and have like a first page, last page, next page, like all of the pages based on the section headers that you create. So you aren't necessarily limited to having all of your questions on the same page as when you create them. You have the option when you're creating fields to have like a required, whether it's required or not, and this just gives you a display for the participants to make sure that you have to provide the value instead of just having that pop up at the end that says like, hey, you didn't fill out this form or this field. And then the last bit of the survey customizations is there's a couple different accessibility features. So if you want to have a font resize toggle so that you can change the size of the font as you're going through the survey, either text to speech, aggregating all the results at the end of the survey to see what all is being submitted, and then whether or not you want to change the submit button labels. Currently, I think the standard is it just says submit or it just says previous page or next page, but you can specify what whether it's like the section headers or something if you want to change that. And we're going backwards. So there's a couple more options. This is a very long page within survey settings. So most of the time the defaults are fine. The defaults for the response limit is that there's no response limit, there's no time limit, and there's no survey expiration. So if you have something that you need a time limit or you only want people to be able to respond like 10 times, or if you have a survey expiration that instead of having a time limit, you want it to be a date instead, you can enable those here in the survey access part of the survey settings. You can allow save and return options later. So this might be something that you want to enable if you know your participants ahead of time. But if you don't know your participants ahead of time, this might not be a great option because, and you can enable whether or not they need a return code and whether or not they can return and modify completed responses. So if you just want them to enter it in the one time and not return again to make any changes to it, then I would leave those disabled. Your survey termination options are just kind of what happens at the end of the survey. Since this is also just survey settings for a particular survey. So for example, our example survey, do we want to auto continue to the next survey that's a test survey? This is something that you can add optional conditional logic to. So only if they selected yes for one field, or if they qualify for the next survey, you can add those here so that way it doesn't auto-continue everyone, even though a participant is not qualified to continue the study. You can redirect it to a URL, which might be a different survey or a survey within a different project. And then lastly, there's survey completion text, which you can customize. Typically, it just says, thank you for completing the survey, but sometimes you want to make sure like, hey, at least for our request portal, we have specific text saying that we will respond within 2 to 4 business days, depending. So keep an eye out in your email for our response. For fields in a survey space, you can, if you ever see the little stop sign icon, it's for the survey stop action, which means once someone answers something in there that enables a stop action, so like definitely not qualified for the next part or the next survey that comes up, there's the option to save participant response even if they're not qualified, or to only save participant responses if they've completed all the action, all the field names, and that they qualify for the next step. And this one is this send confirmation email option is a default no, but it can be used to send a PDF version of the contents of the submission when an email is provided, and then it just pulls it either from the participant email that gets sent out, or you can enable it as a field within that survey. And then I think once you complete it, if you want to send a confirmation email, it will also ask you, like, what is an email that you would like to send the contents of the submission? And then you can customize the message that gets sent out as well. Okay, that is a lot of information for creating a survey. I know it's like a bunch of extra steps in addition to creating a data form. Are there any questions? Okay. Since I'm not seeing any, I'm also happy to answer any of the questions that come up at the end of the Lunch, Learn, and Collaborate, so just let me know. And then you can also send an email to us as well if there's anything that I cover in here that didn't make any sense. So this part of it is how to distribute a survey. There's a couple different ways. On your left-hand side, once you enable surveys, you'll have under the data collection space a survey distribution tool. And you can go here and get the public survey URL that's displayed here. There's a couple different actions. You can open the public survey, send it as a QR code, send the URL, create a custom survey link. So what happens with this is also good for testing when your project is in development. This survey link, this public survey URL actually won't change once you move the project to production, so you can continue testing in here and maintain the same either QR code or public survey URL when you move your project to production. Typically when people are submitting responses through here, it will be anonymous unless you're collecting identifiable information within the first survey that you've enabled. This may not fit your project design, but if you send and distribute the survey based on the public survey link, participants can take the survey multiple times. And so if you do want them to take the survey multiple times, then I think the public survey link is great. Also, if you're posting it on social media or however you're getting your participants, this is just like a one space that you can send out and mass send instead of having it customized per participant. Oops. So if you do already know ahead of time who your participants are going to be, in that survey distribution tools space, that second tab is the participant list. And what you can do for your initial survey is you can add participants. And also, if you have enabled participant identifiers, you can add those at the same time. And what this does is this keeps track of who's responded and who hasn't. So each participant can respond once. You can make sure that you can go in and you can set reminders for the participants or compose survey invitations again after they've been sent out of like, oh, who hasn't responded. And then on this third tab over here, the survey invitation log, it not only tells you the invitations that have been sent and then the contents of each of those emails, but what invitations are scheduled to be sent out and at what time. So it gives you a lot of control over the participant list to make sure that you again know who's been contacted, who's actually been responded, and then if there's any other metadata information here. And then if you want to export them out, so if you've been adding participants as you go through, you can export the entire list of these participants. So another thing here within the participant list that I wanted to mention is that the survey response status is typically anonymous, which means that it's not recording it's not recording the specific record ID that it's associated with. If that's something that's of concern, then you might want to keep it as anonymous. But if you do want to keep track of exactly what record is associated with which email, you can set it to not anonymous. But that does mean that it's no longer a blind study. Okay, so another option that you can do in addition to the participant survey that allows you to have more, I guess, more focus on like what time you're sending the invitations and what logic you want to become true before you send out the survey invitations is using this automated survey invitation. And this is based on each instrument has their own automated survey invitation configuration that you can set. And this is what pops up when you click automated invitation and then add configuration. It'll tell you what survey it is, just to make sure what event is actually being enabled, whether or not it's an active automated survey invitation or a not active one, what that message is going to look like when you send to your participants, what conditions need to be completed. So for example, if we wanted to enable test 2 after example survey had been completed, we'll select this one when the following survey is completed for example survey. And if we wanted a specific qualifying questions in example survey to be answered yes, then we'll add that additional logic here. So when the following logic becomes true, and only then will it send out an invitation to those participants that fit those particular conditions. And then maybe you want to send this out immediately right after they've completed example survey and they qualify, or you can wait until a particular day at a specific time. Once there's been a time lapse, so maybe your participants aren't filling them out on the same day, but you want to make sure that they wait 3 days after they filled out the example survey, or if there's a group of participants that are filling out the same survey within a week's time, but you want to make sure that the next time that they fill out test 2 is the following Monday, then you can specify that exact day and time. The last bit that I like about the automated survey invitations is you don't have to manually go in and send the participant list that haven't responded a reminder. This can be something that you just enable, check here, that it reminds them if they haven't responded by a specific time. And once you check this box, you'll get a couple more configurable options below that talk about like how long until you wait to send another invitation. And it can be something that's time-based, or it can be like 5 times after the initial invitation has been sent out, something like that. So the alerts and notifications is another way to send out a reminder or a like, hey, please participate on this follow-up survey. And there's a couple different ways of triggering the event. So it can be not just when a survey is completed, but if a survey is saved with any form status, whether it's incomplete, and that can be, sorry, not survey, when an instrument has been saved with an incomplete status or an unverified status as opposed to just a complete status. And then specifically if there's conditional logic when a record is saved or during a data import. When we're doing this, below all of these different configurations, you can send the survey links by using piping. So this is kind of what it's going to look like if you're using piping. So the event name, the survey URL, the survey URL will stay just survey URL, and then the survey name will change to whatever the survey is called. So for example, our first survey is called example survey, so it would be survey URL : example survey. And then same thing for here, where we just change the event name, the survey name, but this will actually show up as a hyperlink that just says click here. So this is just dependent on between alerts and notifications, participant list, and automated survey invitations. They're just three different ways to kind of do a similar like conditional logic dependent send out a notification to fill out a survey. So for the distribution of surveys, if you know that you want your participants to fill out multiple surveys, and you just want to send them one invitation, this is the one way to do it. The survey queue will have a to-do list of the different surveys that they need to complete, and this can be conditional as well. This is what shows up for the participant, and only the surveys that they quote unquote qualify for or that are enabled with conditional logic will show up as the next survey for them to complete. So this is what it looks like for the participants, but on the REDCap user side, in your designer space, on that top bar, there's a survey queue location, and you can edit the survey queue, and this will show up for all of the events and all of the surveys within that event. And it just adds that option to enable each of the surveys when the following survey is complete and or when the following logic becomes true. So again, if the condition is the example survey is completed and they answered all of the qualifying questions correctly, they can move on to the next survey. Okay, so that's all the different ways you can distribute a survey, and then additionally more information when they're in the survey filling out space. So it just depends on the needs that you have within your project design. Do we have any questions so far? Oh, Rebecca.
Hang on.
Okay,
There we go.
sure. What question do you have, Rebecca?
Hi, I was just wondering, when you were talking about distributing the survey to an email list, my understanding had been that if you did that, then they weren't anonymous. I guess I'm a little, but it looks like there's a way to keep it anonymous, but also track who's responded. Is that correct?
Yes. So it won't display the record number that it's associated with, but it will display whether or not they've responded.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we have, because we have a study we're starting where we will know, who's going to be participating. And so we could do it that way. I just had thought that we weren't supposed to because I thought that meant we would know who had responded to what. So, okay, so I can go in
Yeah.
and create the participant list and make sure that the response status is anonymous.
Yeah, so it won't have this participant identifier
Mhm.
enabled, and then it also won't specify what the record ID is,
Okay.
which will make it not anonymous.
And actually, like as the data manager, it would be okay for me to know who responded, I guess.
Yeah. Also,
But
so that you can send reminders out to be like, I know you
exactly.
haven't filled out stuff. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that the data itself will have an email address. It's just for
Right.
distribution. Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. In that case, we'll really quickly talk about surveys in a longitudinal project, because they just work a little bit differently. As we saw before, when you're distributing surveys, the examples that I've been using only have one event and one arm. So if you have multiple events, multiple arms, and that's typically what you'll see in longitudinal projects, it just looks a little bit different. If your first instrument is a survey, you can add the emails in the participant list and then send the survey invitations from the participant list, or define an automated survey invitation. However, if your first instrument is a data entry form, you might need to create a field in it that has the email in the first instrument. And then that way you can enable this additional field in projects setup that will use an email field for communications. And once you have this pop up, once it's enabled, it'll only show with email fields that are in your project. So if you don't have any email fields enabled, that just means that the fields when you create them, when you create a text box one, you have to include the validation that it is an email for it to show up in this space. But to Rebecca's project point, if this was a thing within her project, then the surveys would not be anonymous. Yeah, so this is something, again, if it fits the project design that you have, then this is something that you can do if you need the first instrument to be a data entry form. But typically it's much easier if you have the first instrument as a survey and then a data entry form later on. Okay, are there any questions about that one? That one was relatively short, just because that's something just to keep in mind if you are doing longitudinal projects and surveys. Okay, so our last bit is what a use case looks like. Talking about all of the different things that we had mentioned in terms of our conditional logic and our completing different surveys. So typically what we'll see for a use case is we start off with some sort of screening. This can be within the same project or in a separate project, and then you get pointed to all the rest of the forms if it's in a separate project. But if it's in the same project, we start off with a public survey link, and the consent form only gets triggered after the screening has been completed and the conditional logic, so like whether or not they qualify for the study, are satisfied. And then typically what we'll see in our consent forms is images of the consent PDF, so that way they can see what it looks like as a blank version, and then like specific signature spaces and date signed below. The initial data, so this can be like baseline. Baseline data is also a survey, and that's again only triggered after the consent forms are completed, because you don't want to be collecting initial data unless they've consented to it. And then the data form that I have here is just clinical notes. So if there's any additional information that you have pulled after the initial data, or connecting it with different like medical record information, that can be included here. And that's specifically a data form because that's going to be entered in by staff as opposed to the participant. And you can go back in and edit survey data, but just to keep all things above board and clear editing process, we suggest that you do your manipulation of the data forms themselves, so that you know who's working in what, and it's not necessarily a mix of the data. And then lastly, there can be a follow-up survey that gets triggered by conditional logic based on stuff that's in the clinical notes and the initial data. So that means that you can pull conditional logic from not just one form or one survey. You can have a combination of it to populate and then have automated survey invites for the follow-up survey after a given amount of time since the initial data entry. And so that's what a typical use case looks like. This might not be exactly what works for you guys, but this is what we've typically seen in terms of our mixture of surveys and data form REDCap projects. And I hope that's helpful for you wherever you are in your REDCap project creation. So I'll stop sharing and give it back to Mark.
Perfect. I like the presentation. It gave a lot of different examples and ways to use the same process, but in different ways. It was very informative. I do want to remind everybody that that these slides will be shared. You can always reference it back if you don't have questions at the end of this meeting. Certainly, you can send email to REDCap at fsu.edu. So just to tag on a little bit extra to Marcelina's presentation on surveys is I was working with some colleagues on some ideas that they had in their project. Their project was collecting public survey data, and if everybody, whoever filled out their survey, they got paid a gift card. And they were mentioning they were using ReCAPTCHA it was implemented in their project, and they're still having some issues. A lot of entries that they feel were bogus. And so then I started, okay, well then I'll just maybe talk in addition to Marcelina's conversation about public surveys and bots. There's a lot of information, but I'll just summarize it. Basically, a bot, does not capture all the stop all the activity coming into your public survey. A public survey is out there. It's either on a website. It could be out on a presentation, or whatever. And it's just a way to collect the data for a specific population or a public community. And as a programmer, I too like to program things that are kind of cool and everything. And programmers can produce bots that are not bad. But then there's those guys that try to get a little bit, I don't know, greedy or what. They'll generate some harmful bots that for their gain and expense to people, computers, and networks, or in this case, projects. So I want to talk about a couple of ideas to add to your ReCAPTCHA enabled projects. If you are collecting data that certainly collecting data that is maybe has a benefit of getting a reward card or something, you might want to think about ideas of stopping, adding additional layer, stopping them. One of them is called a honeypot. And what a honeypot is basically a question on a survey that is invisible. And the idea is that a human being in there, they won't see that honeypot question or field, whereas sees everything out there, whether it's hidden or not. And so it's a good way to capture it. I'm going to a couple of quick examples of a field and a human logic or field that can be added to your project to make sure that you can exclude even more of those unwanted surveys. The hidden honeypot. And as I said, bots often fill out all the fields even the hidden ones, because it doesn't know it's a hidden field in the programming side of things. So if to create a field and ask something, maybe the flow of the survey, the bot analyze the data points that is being collected and try to make a decision from there. I for this example, I said we're going to collect name. Well, I don't think I've ever seen a survey, maybe a data survey, but some survey, clinical research, they don't ask for a maiden name. It doesn't matter, whatever you want to call it. Set up an action tag as a hidden survey, so that in itself would capture, expose a bot that is versus a human. This example for the maiden, I have a variable maiden in the name, and then I check the condition if it is null or not. Obviously, if it's null, because you see it. If it's not null, then you want to use one that stop survey that Marcina was talking about in the workflow on a survey. Again, to make sure if information was entered on the survey, in fact it was a bot and not a human. Example I want to talk about is human logic. And so if you create a field, with of the text box, and for example, a human word. Then in the field label, which is actually what the human is to verify that as the question, please type in the word blue text box. Make the field required. Enforce the exact I call it a pop-up field, but it's actually called a descriptive field, and then logic, making all the characters that answer to lowercase and check to see if it equals blue. Obviously, the bot could enter in a word uppercase, all uppercase, first letter, and the rest lowercase or all lowercase. But because of that, the lower command, it would lowercase blue, and then have a label or a pop-up saying that if the answer was incorrect, didn't enter blue because maybe the bot didn't analyze to type, but it needed to type something in. And so I would have a pop-up saying that it was incorrect answer, please go back and fill blue again. But at that point, you go ahead and do a stop action, and you've stopped that bot from filling out the survey. At this point, I want to pause. Alex's monitor hands up and chat. If you got any questions about the great presentation that Marcelina did, and the quick you might want to ask, please do so, like Rebecca did. But again, these slides are going to be going out this week. And if you come up with any other questions, feel free to send the redcu.edu mailbox. And I'll pause for a minute, see if Alex sees any.
None so far.
Okay, well, up with some ideas or questions or thoughts, so, and send it to redcap@fsu.edu. Reminder, actually put a more comprehensive list of links in the chat, as we do at all of our LLC presentations. I always like to mention, this is the survey. If anybody is truly interested in joining us to share thoughts and challenges, some exciting stuff in there with our REDCap colleagues that may be helpful, we would love for you to go to this link and click that and fill out and join us one of those one of our sessions. Also, link and technical in our REDCap.
Mark, we have a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Mark, we have a question.
Oh,
Hi, it's me again. This isn't really about the presentation you just did, but I'm sorry, I'm new to all of this, so
yes,
um,
great. You're fine.
I just programmed a longitudinal randomized study in REDCap, and I just want to make sure that we're testing it thoroughly because, it's my first time and I'm sure there's mistakes that I haven't anticipated. And I think Marcelina mentioned something about testing, but I'm just looking, like I was trying to figure out, do I just use the go to survey distribution tools and use the public survey URL and people can go through it as many times as they want? Because the thing is, since it's longitudinal, I created the different events. So
Mhm.
like our baseline survey, it should automatically go through the whole thing. But then after that, I guess I would have to go in and randomize them and then send them yeah, I'm just not sure how the testing
Workflow.
of the whole thing works.
Yeah. Marcelina?
Yeah, so essentially, yeah, it depends on how the study design is. If you're planning on randomizing them, like depending on a specific field, or is it just a complete randomization? There should be an option in project setup that allows you to specify how you're randomizing them.
Mhm.
And then as you're I think what we've seen before, I mentioned it like very briefly, is that the screening process that has the public survey link is maybe a separate project. And then that way, the only data that you have in your, like where the actual data is stored is instead, and like the ones that you're randomizing are the
Oh, I
ones that
see.
qualify for it.
I see. I
Um,
see.
so that can be a different option. But if you want to, if you can actually follow that technical support link that we have on screen and then fill out
Uh-huh.
a support request, and then we'll get with you, and that way we can walk you through the process and we can
Okay.
work through it this
Great.
week. Yeah,
Thank you so much.
of course.
Of course. Well, it's time to wrap up our wonderful presentation, and the maybe some helpful notes in this meeting. Do want to thank everyone for attending today. We're trying to do a better job at starting our presentations through the months as people like Rebecca building a new project and adding on new cool things they may not have known about it in the REDCap, or even folks that have been in REDCap but never built a longitudinal survey or something like that. We're excited to have as many people as we can to join, as well as here, hint, hint, wink, wink. But our next program is going to be Wednesday, March 25th, again, 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. Our planned, unless we get someone that's interested to share with us, currently our topic will be user roles and DAGs within a project. And we're doing a flip decide present on that. But appreciate you everybody showing up. Hopefully you've learned some information. Look for with our slides that Alex will be also sharing. And we'll look forward to seeing you on March 25th. Hope everybody has a blessed day. Goodbye.